going to throw. One-on-one. Davis has it. Touchdown. Carolina wins. Carolina is the Coastal Division champion. Javonte Williams to the left of Howell. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howell looking, standing tall, lets it go. Man there. Touchdown. Touchdown, Carolina. The pistol. Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson. He tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted. Surratt intercepts it. Holy cow, Carolina's going to win. And off to Javonte Williams again. Pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back. Pressure coming. Aguilar floats it up. Incomplete. No flags. Head on back up the mountain. Carolina wins it in double overtime. Loftus out of the shotgun. Throws to the end zone. Incomplete. Incomplete. The bell belongs to us. Carolina wins it. 47-45 in double overtime.
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
Hey guys, and welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you guys as always. And tonight's edition of the podcast, it is time to get our official record predictions out there for you guys. We know this is one of those big seasons, so we wanted to come back after we do this normally early in the off season when we get the schedule. Well, we wanted to come back today and do it for you guys here as we get towards the very end of the off season and we sit here in the preseason as Carolina gets ready to take on TCU. That will be just a week from tonight. At this time, Carolina will just have kicked off against TCU, or we're at least hoping they will just have kicked off. There's a chance that they will not, as we know with network television and everything, how that works. But we are going to be giving you our official record predictions throughout the night here, going game by game, telling you who wins each game and why we think that ends up happening. The other thing is we want to hear from you guys. Get in the comments. Tell us your record predictions for this season. Tell us, if you want to, who ends up beating Carolina, because we know that there's probably going to be more wins than losses for a lot of you guys. But hey, if you're one of those Tar Heel fans that seem would be a little bit down on the season, well, that's fine too. Make sure you get those record predictions in for us. And we also want to hear your breakout players, because we're going to be doing that here in the second half of the show as well. So make sure that you stick around for all of that here on this edition of the podcast. But as I mentioned, we're going to start out by going through the schedule game by game and predicting the records for Carolina this season. And of course, it starts, as we talked about, 1 week from tonight at home against the TCU Horned Frogs in Kenan Stadium. The Horned Frogs, this will be one of I believe, if not the first trip to Kenan Stadium. I think it's the second time they will ever take a trip to Kenan Stadium to face the Tar Heels. And this one is a big one to start out, a tone setter for the Tar Heels as they try to get off the schneid against a team that returns 10 starters from a year ago, including their starting quarterback, Josh Hoover. They returned 6 guys on the defensive side of the ball, led by safety Bud Clark, a guy that's been there for years now, was a part of that national title team or the team that played for the national title just a few years back. And so this is a very tough test right out of the gate against the TCU Horned Frogs. ESPN FPI gives the Horned Frogs a 58.7% chance to win this one. What do you think about this one going into it?
Yeah, it's definitely understandable why the FPI favors TCU. I think TCU will show up, even according to Vegas, as the favorite coming into this game. And that makes sense because you know more about TCU than we know about ourselves. You had a quarterback that last year for the Horned Frogs put up the most passing yards in a single season in program history. And you look at the quarterbacks that have come through Fort Worth since Andy Dalton. They've put up some pretty big numbers at different times, on their way to, as you mentioned a few years ago, playing for a national championship. TCU also has experience playing in a season opener where they're forgotten about because it wasn't too long ago, 3 years ago to be exact, they took on Colorado in Deion's first game at the college level when he was leading that program, and they got upset. That game was at home. That game was at noon, but they still found a way to get beat. This game's on the road. This game is at night, and for as big as that game was, I mean, this is going to be an even bigger deal, if you can believe it or not, just because, it's not just the college football world we'll be watching. So will the NFL world, because the evaluation of Bill Belichick and maybe being in the NFL starts next Monday for teams that will have a head coaching vacancy that maybe we're not interested in hiring him in this past coaching cycle. So Carolina's going to have their hands full. But what you see in college football, I think, more so than any other sport, especially like in a season opener setting, is environments and atmospheres can really play the difference. And look, man, we've been blessed to be inside Kenan Stadium for some big moments. Mac Brown's first home game comes to mind after he returned for his second stint. There have been some other big games that Carolina has played, but no one can even imagine what next Monday is going to be like. Like, spectacle was the only way I know how to describe it, because that's what it's going to be. There's going to be an energy of fever and excitement in that building that we've never felt as Tar Heel fans, whether it's on the football side or the basketball side. And I think, this has been, once we got to the training camp, this has been the type of training camp that Bill Belichick wanted to run. No nonsense, no BS. Let's just get down to play football. And I think that's going to benefit Carolina. And I think they'll come away. And maybe it's because I don't want to have to think about being in that stadium and walking out of there with a loss. But I think Carolina is going to find a way to win and set the tone for what I think is going to be a big-time season. I think Carolina emerges victorious 28-24 next Monday night in Kenan.
All right, well, I won't give you the score prediction because I'm going to save that for when we do the preview edition of the podcast. But, this is a tough matchup out of the gate. You're going against a guy that, as you mentioned, set the school record for passing yards a year ago in Josh Hoover through 27 touchdowns. Looks like he's going to be one of the best coming back in the Big 12. I really like their wide receiving core as well with Eric McAllister. They bring in Jordan Dwyer, a guy that was a 1,000-yard receiver with Idaho at the FCS level. And there's also some people that really like Joseph Manjack IV as well. That's certainly a guy that could have an effect there. The biggest thing for them is, are they going to be able to run the ball? They were one of the worst teams in the entire country a year ago, running the football at 113.9 yards per carry. So this is a chance for Carolina's run defense to really establish itself out of the gate. My thing is how are they going to slow down this passing attack from TCU? Are they going to be able to get after the quarterback? I don't know if they're going to be able to do that necessarily in the first game. I'll be interested to see, but I do still have questions about that defensive front. And that's part of the reason why I feel like you might go into this game feeling a little bit concerned about where exactly Carolina stands going up against this TCU offense. Defensively, I mean, this is a pretty middle-of-the-road defense. I mean, they allowed 24.6 points per game last year under defensive coordinator Andy Abulos. He is back this season. You would expect that they are once again going to be pretty solid there. I mean, Bud Clark is the guy that is an all-12 member, Big 12 member. Certainly a guy that I think is going to have a pretty big season there. And then, you've also got a couple other guys like Nnamdi Obiizor, who I think is certainly going to be a really strong player for them in the middle, and Caleb Alarms Orr, who is also was an all-12 Pac-12 linebacker before transferring to TCU. So they've got a lot of things that you really like on across the board. I think their defense is really going to test Carolina's offense coming out in this one because, there are a lot of question marks for Carolina on the offensive side of the ball. But, man, this is, as you said, it's going to be an amazing environment in Kenan Stadium. I think this is probably going to be one of the best environments that we see all year. I'm hoping that hopefully some of the ones later in the year sort of match this because Carolina fans continue to show out as the year goes along, but nothing is a guarantee. I think because of the type of test that you're facing, a team that's so experienced and a team that I think is going to be one of the sleepers in the Big 12. I said it before when we looked at this game on the schedule, and I'll say it again. I think Carolina probably loses a close one in this one because I do think TCU has the quarterback advantage. Josh Hoover will make some plays late, and I think Carolina gets beat in this first game of the season. But I'm hoping that doesn't, dissuade a lot of these Tar Heel fans from coming out to the stadium whenever they take on Richmond and eventually when they get into conference play and take on Clemson to start conference play on October 4th. So you move on from there. This is a game that I think Carolina, should win no matter what. And this is Carolina on the road against Charlotte. And the 49ers, coming into this year, new head coach Tim Albin, there is a lot of expectation around that program that they're going to take a step forward this season under a guy that, is looked at as one of the better mid-major coaches over the last few years, what he did at Ohio. Now going to Charlotte, will he be able to do similar stuff with them there? To me, look, Carolina with a 77.7% chance to win this game. Our coworker Smoke Ludwig said earlier today that Carolina is going to start 0-2, so he has them losing this game. I think this would be an absolutely devastating loss if Carolina was to lose this game against Charlotte, or even with it being on the road.
Yeah, the difference in a game like this, as opposed to like when App has either played us close or beaten us, man, App has a tradition of winning, and the program was ready for those types of moments, having won, road games at Michigan, at Texas A&M in the past. Charlotte has nothing of that to their ledger. They've gone to a bowl game. That's all they have literally done. They're just coming off, firing a coach that, wore a tank top on the sidelines and talked a big talk, but could not back it up on the football field. Tim Albin, I think, will build them into a winner. I think Tim Albin will build them into a contender. Look at what he did at Ohio. I think 3 10-win seasons, taking over for the legendary Frank Solich there. He can coach, and I think he can and will win. If this was maybe year 3, year 4 of Tim Albin, you could maybe put me on upset alert and I would hear you. But that's not the case. I mean, as many new players as Carolina has, there's not as many at Charlotte, but there's a lot of new players there as well. Just from a talent perspective, an athlete perspective, Carolina's still bigger, faster, stronger, deeper than Charlotte is. So do I think Carolina's going to go there and beat them by 50? No, I do not, because that place will be as energetic as it's ever been. They'll be fired up, looking to make a statement in the first year of their head coach as well. But I don't see a situation where Carolina loses. So on my end, I have Carolina starting out 2-0 under Bill Belichick.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those games where Carolina there's no way they're going to lose this game. I would be absolutely stunned if they lost to Charlotte. I mean, you're talking about a team that returns 2 starters from a year ago. Even Carolina has more than that are returning from last year. So that shows you where their program is. They are doing a lot of overhaul as well. Now, he brought some of his guys from Ohio with him, but it's not nearly as many as he would probably like. So I don't necessarily think Charlotte is a force to be reckoned with this year. I think further down the line, that's when you start to have those conversations. And here's the thing. You're facing Connor Harrell in this game. He was just named their starting quarterback. So unless something goes dramatically wrong in the first game of the season, you would imagine that he's still going to be their quarterback in that second game of the year. Carolina better win this game, and they better win pretty handedly, because last year, this was the game that should have signified to us that something was wrong with this squad. Now, I think that Tim Albin deserves a lot more credit, And if he puts up a competitive fight against Carolina, I think that certainly shows more about Tim Albin than it shows about Carolina. But you hope that this is not one of those games where Carolina gets tripped up in, early on in the season, because an 0-2 start here, you find it really hard. As easy as this schedule is, if you can't beat Charlotte, I find it really hard to believe Carolina is going to find their way into a bowl game. And again, I love our coworker Smoke. I think that's one of the stupidest things I've ever heard come out of his mouth during his time at WFNZ, because this team, Carolina is going to be motivated, in my mind, coming off the loss against TCU. For you, they would be motivated to continue a really good start to the season against Charlotte. So I think it's pretty easy to see them winning that game. You then go to Richmond. Yeah, this one way too easy for me. I think Richmond, a team that was pretty good in the FCS a year ago, a playoff team in the FCS. I know they have some history as a program. This one should be an easy win for Carolina. I don't even have the FPI pulled up in front of me just yet, but I would believe Carolina probably wins this game and wins it comfortably.
Yeah, this is one of the games I've really talked about when we were doing our position previews, where you look to really build some depth and find out some more about your roster in this game, because it should be over, bare minimum by middle of the third quarter, to where you got most of the starters out, and you can really play the depth guys on your roster. And I think, that's certainly what I think is going to happen. And so, yeah, there's not a scenario where I envision Carolina losing this game. Could it maybe be close? Yeah, it could be. We saw Carolina be close at home against an FCS opponent last year. But that may have been the first sign of what that team was going to eventually become, which was a middle-of-the-road football team. I don't think that's going to happen because, as you know, with Bill Belichick, he'll make sure that he has his team's attention every single week, no matter who the opponent is. So I expect Carolina to win that game in a big way, which would, for me, have them off to a 3-0 start.
Yeah, so then you move on to Central Florida. Carolina has to go on the road to take on the Central Florida Knights. This is a game that the FPI strongly favors Central Florida. They have them at a 74.5% chance to win this game. To me, that's absolutely crazy. This is a team coming off a 4-8 season last year. They have a brand new head coach in Scott Frost. They returned just one starter on the offensive side of the ball, only 3 on the defensive side of the ball. So this is another team that's really having to do a complete overhaul of their roster under a new head coach. I don't like their quarterback situation. Cam Fancher is the guy that won the starting job there. He's a transfer from Florida Atlantic, where he wasn't all that successful there. I think this is a game that, even though it says that Central Florida should be strongly favored, I would think going into this matchup, Carolina will be favored in Vegas and should be the favorite to win this game.
Yeah, what's really odd about this is that when you hear national football people talk about this game, they chalk it up as Carolina will win. I heard Reese Davis say it this past Saturday on College Football Countdown when he was on with Roddy Jones and EJ Manuel, 2 guys that know and cover the ACC as well as anybody over there at the mothership. And they didn't try to push back. They didn't try to challenge him on that when they were looking at Carolina's schedule. Maybe when I first saw this game, back when the Belichick got hired and we had the initial wave of the transfer portal, I probably had Carolina losing this game, or at least had them maybe winning it very closely. And I think Scott Frost is going to do a great job there because he's familiar with the area. He knows how to build a winner. But that's a program that's very much in transition under him. And as he's making his second stint there in Orlando, the heat might be the biggest factor in terms of, could Carolina lose the game depending on what their depth situation looks like. But with where the roster is at after the spring transfer window, where Carolina got, I thought, a lot more talented and a lot more deeper, I do like them in this game. And that, for me, has them off to a 4-0 start, believe it or not. And I think what's really important to look at is if Carolina is 4-0, and I don't even think it really matters what Clemson is, but if Clemson is 4-0, you're probably looking at a chance that first Saturday in October, because Carolina has that bye week, where College game day makes its first actual full-blown pilgrimage to Chapel Hill for a Saturday game, which I think would just be an amazing experience for what could be the beginning of an amazing season for Bill Belichick. So, not that that's the most important thing, but that game day will be looking for any excuse to get to Chapel Hill if Carolina is good. If they're 4-0 when a top 5 Clemson team could be coming to town, expect game day to be on site for that one.
Yeah, I think they beat Central Florida as well. I just don't see enough there for the Knights. I mean, yeah, I think they love the fact that they're getting Scott Frost back. Maybe he is able to make them a consistent contender in the Big 12 here at some point. But I just don't know that that's going to happen this year. I think there's a lot that they have to navigate. They're defensively, I don't think they're going to be that great of a team. And offensively, I think they're going to really struggle because I think their quarterback spot is a complete disaster. We've seen it play out here in the preseason. I thought that Taven Jackson was going to win the starting job there. He did not. And so to me, that shows that this is a group that's going to probably struggle early on in the season. And I think Carolina will be able to take advantage of that. Then you talked about it. Carolina gets a bye week. Then they head back home to take on the Clemson Tigers. And the last time that Clemson was in Kenan Stadium back in 2019, nearly an upset by Carolina and a freshman quarterback in Sam Howell. This game will be a little bit different. Carolina with a more experienced quarterback, albeit not at the power conference level, but still, could be one of those games, especially if it's a night game that has an unbelievable environment around it as Carolina gets ready to welcome in the Clemson Tigers.
Yeah, this is the one where I'm not going to go out and pick Carolina to win the game. I'm not. I think Carolina will lose to Clemson. This could be the game where we learn just how good this team is, if this coaching staff is worth their salt, and if they're earning their paychecks. Because I referenced that game you mentioned a few minutes ago on the air last week because my host said that there's not a chance in hell that we win the game. Doesn't even think that we'll compete in the game. Thinks that Clemson will come into our stadium and blow us out. And I had to remind him that the last time that a Clemson team that was kind of set up like this team is for this year came to Chapel Hill, Carolina was a 2-point conversion away from pulling the upset, and played them extremely close and was, for us in year one of Mac Brown was a real sign of encouragement of how far we thought the program had come in just in such a short order. I think the same thing is going to be in play here where I think Carolina will lose, but I think Carolina loses a competitive game that might garner more respect nationally and within the fan base than the 4-0 start will, just because of what Clemson is, what Clemson represents. And, if you are of the opinion like I am, I think Clemson's going to win the national championship. So if you can go toe-to-toe with a national championship caliber program in year one while your head coach is making the adjustment from the NFL game to the college game, you would really start to believe that this Bill Belichick experiment is going to work in a big way. So I think Carolina falls short. I think they lose a one-possession game, but kind of like it was back in 2019, one that we would be disappointed in the result, but proud of the effort and proud of the progress.
Yeah, I think it's much the same. I think Carolina really puts up a fight in this game. I think by this point, you will start to see the Carolina offense getting in a rhythm. You will see Gio Lopez starting to move this offense more consistently up and down the field. You'll see Carolina's running game really start to be the strength of this year's team. Defensively, I think we'll know what this group is. And I think they will be a very solid group. I don't think they're going to be great. I don't think they're going to be below average. I think they're going to be right at average. I think they're going to be right where the Washington defense was last year under Steven Belichick. And I think that's going to be enough to keep Carolina competitive in this one. But ultimately, there's too much talent on the field. I think what's going to happen is Carolina will get worn down as this game goes along because what you're going up against in the trenches is maybe the best offensive line in the country and probably, I think, safely in many people's minds, the best defensive line in the country. So How does Carolina match up against that? I think they'll do well for the first 2.5, 3 quarters. But I think as the game goes along, they'll probably get worn down. And so I'm with you. I think Carolina puts up a really competitive fight in this one. Similar to some of the games that we've seen here recently against Clemson, but I just don't think it's enough in the end to give Carolina the win. Then after that, Carolina goes into another bye before they then take on the California Golden Bears. And, this is a game where Carolina going to go on the road. It'll be on a Friday night against Cal. Cal comes in with a 58% chance to win this one, according to the Football Power Index. But I mean, this is one that, Carolina going up against one of the worst teams in the conference, I expect this year. I expect them to have much stronger odds by that point, especially with them being 3-2 and having a close loss to Clemson than they have sitting here at the start of the year in this matchup with Cal.
Yeah. I would be open to saying Carolina could lose this game if the bye week wasn't after the Clemson game. If the Clemson game goes the way that we think it's going to go, where Carolina gets beat, but it's competitive as crap, emotional, you got to go out west on a short week, on a Friday night, you could convince me there's a way Carolina loses the game. First time making the West Coast road trip, with Cal being in an ACC school. We saw how they almost beat Miami a year ago. So it's not like you've seen good teams go out there and not struggle before. We have seen that just as recently as last year. I do think that bye week, though, really helps them to get their bodies kind of back right. Put an emotional loss behind them. And then I think kind of the experience of, all the NFL guys on this staff, I think will really play dividends, where you got the bye week, but you got a short week coming out of the bye week, but you got to make a West Coast trip. Bill Belichick's done that plenty of times during his time in the NFL. He'll know how to get his team prepared for how just different and unique that game will be, and it's going to be unique because we'll be watching Carolina play football at 1 o'clock in the morning, and it'll be a conference game. It'll be a game that matters in the ACC standings. Nonetheless, I do think Carolina does emerge victorious, which in my book has them improving to 5-1 and on the doorstep of becoming bowl eligible.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think they're going to win this game because you talked about it. The bye week is key. They're going to be able to hopefully go out there a little bit earlier, sort of get their bodies ready for what is going to be a late kickoff, and get used to what it's going to be like playing out there in a stadium that might not be all that full, to be honest with you, by that time of the season. Because Cal, I expect they're going to be one of the worst teams in the ACC this year. I certainly think that with all that they lost running game wise, they lost their top, I think it was 5 running backs to the transfer portal, something along those lines. They're starting a true freshman at quarterback, a guy that has some potential, but I do think is going to take a little bit of time to sort of develop in their system. And then you got an offensive line that allowed 50 sacks a year ago. How are they going to respond this year? I mean, yes, they've overhauled that offensive line. Luckily for them, they have just 1 returning starter, or 2 returning starters, from that unit. One of them not expected to start the year as a starter. I mean, yeah, they're overhauling that line, but I still think that that's going to be a weakness for them, and Carolina should be able to exploit that. Hopefully by this time, Carolina's defensive line is in a little bit of a rhythm, and you know who's going to be playing up front there for you by this point on the schedule. But I just think Carolina's the better team. I think there's way too many question marks with Cal. That doesn't even start with the defensive side of the ball, where they got to replace their entire secondary. Really a lot of work to be done in that back 6. So I definitely think Carolina is the team that should be favored in this game, and I think that will happen by the time they get to it. I think they win as well, and they will be 4-2 on the season for me, as they then get ready to head into a matchup with the Virginia Cavaliers. The Virginia, this one at home for Carolina. I know that Virginia has gone there, has upset some special seasons before for the Tar Heels, but Carolina is a 61.8% favorite according to ESPN Analytics. It's not the FPI. Now they have their own analytics department, I guess, that puts this together. They are going to be favored in this game. You'd imagine by this point in the season could be strongly favored against a Virginia team that's a little bit of a mystery coming into this season.
Yeah, when Bill Belichick got hired, he talked about, beating Duke. That was his first words. I think he'll understand the importance of us wanting to beat NC State with all the recent losses to them in the rivalry. And I hope it's made known to him this game is important. This game matters. This is a rivalry game. And I will defend this game until my death, while guys like Chris McClain, who has the platform he has, will tell me that the game is not important. It does not matter, despite it being the longest standing played rivalry game in the ACC. With that all being said, I do think, what you'll see from Carolina in these rivalry games is I think you'll see Bill Belichick treat them like division games when he was with the Patriots. And we all know what he did against the Jets, what he did against the Bills, and what he did against the Dolphins. He kicked their ass. And I think there will kind of be that same mindset when they go into these games that matter to the program and to us, the fans. This game's always weird because even when Virginia is not good, it doesn't matter. They've walked into our stadium, and as you mentioned, they ruined a special season 2 years ago. And they've done it at different points in time as well. But I don't think it'll happen this year. I know a lot of people think that Virginia is poised to break through this year under Tony Elliott. I don't know what that looks like. I mean, for that program, it could be 6 wins. It could be 7 wins. It could be 5 wins just for just knowing Virginia football. I don't know. But I don't see Carolina losing this game. I think, this is where Gio Lopez really starts to come into his own, taking command of the offense. The defense will know itself inside and out in terms of rotation, scheme, and everything like that. So I think Carolina wins this game, and they get the first check mark of the season for Bill Belichick, which is getting to bowl eligibility. And if this team is sitting here at 6-1, depending on what Miami looks like in the ACC, considering how well we think Carolina will compete against Clemson, there will be that talk starting to build around the program as could they maybe find their way to Charlotte in year one under Bill Belichick. And I think that's definitely on the table because I have them starting the season 6-1.
Yeah, I mean, I think they win this game. I mean, Virginia, to me, they are going to take a step in the right direction. I think they'll get to 6 wins this year, and I see it on their schedule. But, look, I think Chandler Morris is going to be a test at quarterback. I think it's going to be the best quarterback that they've had since Bryce Perkins was there. I think that certainly is going to be something that Carolina will have to contend with. This is one of those games that, to me, could be close, and it would not shock me. Because I think defensively they returned 6 starters from a defense that had showed some signs of being solid a year ago. They do have to replace one of their better players in Jonas Sanker on the back end of this defense. But for the most part, I like they have a returning starters at each level and all guys that I like. I mean, I like their linebacking core with James Jackson and Cam Robinson. You look at their secondary, Antonio Clary is the new safety that I think is going to be a name to keep an eye on that could make it to the NFL. Jam Jackson at the cornerback position coming off a really solid year as well. So they're hoping that's one of the areas that they think could be a little bit of an issue for them, but they're hoping that Jam Jackson can really take a step forward this year. But, I mean, yeah, I think overall – Virginia is going to be one of those teams that's going to get better as the year goes along. I think Carolina gets them at a pretty advantageous spot on the schedule because it's still the middle of the year. I don't know if Virginia will have hit their stride at this point in the season. I think that you're right. If this was Mac Brown, I believe Carolina probably loses this game because I think they're going to come in as favorites. They'll probably be like a touchdown favorite in this game. And those are the types of games that Mac Brown always found a way to lose. I don't think that's going to be Bill Belichick. I think it's going to be different. He'll be settling into a rhythm as a coach, along with, Gio Lopez in the offense and what we've talked about on the defensive side of the ball. So give me Carolina to win this game over Virginia. and get to 5-2 on the season. So then you go to the Thursday night matchup that Carolina has. This is going to be on Halloween night on the road against the Syracuse Orange. Syracuse, a 55.2% chance to win this game. So once again, another game that Carolina is not favored in on the road. This will be one of the tougher road tests, I think, for Carolina. Don't get fooled by whatever Syracuse's record is going into this game, because they have one of the toughest schedules in the entire country. But Fran Brown is no joke as a head coach, and there is a lot more talent on this Syracuse team than some of the ones that Carolina has faced in the past.
Yeah, and it's why I think Carolina falls short in this game. I think this is a second loss for them. We saw what Fran Brown did last year at Syracuse. One of the best coaching jobs we've seen in the last handful of years in college football. Knocked Miami not only out of the ACC championship, but knocked Miami out of the college football playoff. And for a program like Syracuse that in this climate, in this era, they're not the national program that they used to be back when they had, guys competing for Heisman trophies and they were a top 25 team in the Big East year in, year out. That's not what Syracuse football is in 2025, but it's still a program that, can beat big-time teams. We've seen them beat Clemson. When Clemson was at its peak under Dabo Swinney. I just mentioned the Miami win a year ago. I think this is where a short week on the road, maybe it plays a bigger factor than we maybe want to admit, coming off that rivalry game against Virginia. But I do think Carolina gets tripped up. I think they lose, a game probably like 31-28, 34-31. But I think Carolina falls to the Orange to not improve to 6-2, but find themselves sitting at 6-2 with 4 games to go.
Yeah, and so Carolina, this game is actually on a Friday night. I thought they did have a Friday game and then a Thursday game. They do not. It's both on Friday night. But again, this one's going to be a short turnaround for Carolina. So you're going to have, you've got 3 short turnarounds on your schedule. Charlotte's a short turnaround, the shortest of all the turnarounds for Carolina, but still it is Charlotte. You're going to have the, not a short turnaround. You're going to have the longer one because you do have the bye week with Cal, but in a normal week, that would be a short turnaround. And then you'll have the second short turnaround of the year. So just 2 of them with Syracuse coming off that game against Virginia. I think that certainly plays a factor here. I think the fact that this is a road game will play a factor. And I think the desperation factor for Syracuse will play a factor as well. This is one of the games that they really need if they're going to get to a bowl game. There are not a lot of winnable games on their schedule. Who knows, that one in the opener could be a lot more winnable than I think we once thought, with Nico Iamaleava no longer at Tennessee and them having to bring in Joey Aguilar to take over as their quarterback. But who knows what it ultimately ends up looking like for Syracuse this season. This could be one of those games that they say, hey, this is one of our few opportunities at home on a Friday night on a short week. This is one that we got to be able to take. I think they've got enough talent. I know they lost a lot last year. They're having to replace Quinn Allen at running back. They're having to replace Trevor Pena at wide receiver, Orrin Gadsden at tight end. Those are a lot of big names that they have to replace. But I think by this time in the season, they will have done it. Defensively, I think there are a lot of guys that they have to replace as well. But this is a guy in Fran Brown who's done a really good job recruiting at the high school level and done a really good job in the transfer portal. I believe that Carolina loses this game as well. And so that will drop them to 9 or to 5-3 on the season. And so at this point, the best that I can have them winning is 9 games, which means for me, they are pretty much out of contention to win the ACC. I think, or make it to the ACC championship game. I know for you, it would definitely still be well in the cards, even with 2 losses in conference play. But I think for Carolina, if they have 3 losses on the season, it's kind of hard to see them with that record getting into the ACC championship game again, unless a lot of things broke right. And so you go from there and you move on. Carolina the next week takes on the Stanford Cardinal. We got a preview of Stanford this past week with new quarterback Ben Gulbranson, the transfer from Oregon State. This is a team that couldn't even beat Hawaii. And so Carolina, the ESPN analytics give Carolina a 72.8% chance to win this game. I would argue that's way too low for Carolina. They should be favored by even more than that. I think this should be a game they should be favored maybe even more than the game against Charlotte to win, because Stanford is really just that bad. This should be an easy layup for Carolina at this point in the schedule.
Yeah, you mentioned the Virginia game, right? And if Mac Brown was still here, maybe you have Carolina falling short in that contest. I think November is going to be a real telltale sign that there's a new regime in town, because if Carolina's sitting at 6-2, you would think that they would have everything in front of them. They would probably need some help to get to Charlotte, but they're still in play to make the ACC championship game and maybe back their way into the college football playoff. So, what does that look like under Bill Belichick as compared to what we saw in those years under Mac Brown? I think Carolina kicks off the month of November in a big way and maybe gets their most decisive victory in conference play that they'll get all year long against a Stanford team that's not very good, that has to travel all the way across the country. By that point, they are probably going to be eliminated from bowl contention. What's the interest in them wanting to play? What's that going to be like? I feel bad for a guy like Frank Reich, who's a good man, but has taken over an impossible situation. I'd love for Andrew Luck, who's their GM, to restore Stanford football to what it was to when Jim Harbaugh was there and they were a national title threat for about a 3 to 5 year span. I think that'd be kind of cool with them being in the ACC, but that's not the reality of where that program is at right now. So I think Carolina kicks off the final month of the season in a big way to improve to 7-2, which would ensure a winning season for Bill Belichick his first year in the collegiate game.
I mean, look, they bring in some transfers to Stanford that were with Power 5 programs. There's a reason they are no longer with those Power 4 programs, and now they're stuck being at Stanford. This is one of the worst situations that you could be in the entire country. And Frank Reich, you're right. I mean, he is a good football man, but man, he is challenged with a job that nobody else in the country really wanted. And the fact that they lost to Hawaii, that was one of 2 games on their schedule that I saw them winning the entire season. That and San Jose State, that was pretty much it. So if they can't win that game, how in the world do we think they're going to go on the road and find a way to even compete against Carolina, who by this time will be whatever they are? And I think by this point, they will be a pretty good football team. I have them winning this game, winning it significantly, and moving on to face the Wake Forest Demon Deacons as a bowl-eligible team. And so you get to the game against Wake Forest. This is a road game for Carolina against the Demon Deacons. They are 64.9% favorites, though, according to ESPN Analytics. This is one of those games that the last few times Carolina has met, Carolina has found a way to win these games, but they have been absolute track meets. I'm hoping this year things are just a little bit different on the Carolina front.
Yeah, they've been fun games. They've been competitive games. They've also been, as you mentioned, high-scoring games, with games getting not only into the 40s, but even up into the 50s. I don't think it's going to be quite like that. A new style of football coming to Wake Forest. I think Jake Dickert is going to prove to be a really good coach and maybe was the right guy for the job as they enter the post-Dave Clawson era there in Winston-Salem. But I look at this game, for Carolina, and even though it's on the road, it's going to be a lot of Carolina fans. It'll be a de facto home game because I don't think Wake Forest is going to be competing to go to a bowl game. So I think there could be a lot of Carolina fans there, and I think Carolina comes away with another victory. I think they improve to 8-2. They get another win on the road to kind of build some confidence in a team that has struggled to win on the road at different times. But by my count, if they win that game, that'd be their third win away from home, which isn't or the fourth win away from home. So would not be a bad thing to talk about, or to be would not be something to joke about, because this is a team that's got 70 new players on it. You win 4 games away from home, you're a good football team. And I think it's what this team is going to turn into be. So I think it'll be a competitive game, because that's what games against Wake Forest have always been. But like always, I think Carolina makes a play or two late in the fourth quarter. I got the Heels emerging victorious and walking away 8-2.
Yeah, a team that rolls in just 6 returning starters from a year ago. So there's a lot of things that they have to get right by this point in the season. I think they will have some of it squared away. I think they're going to be a very good rushing team. I think that is there is no doubt about that, because you've got a guy in Damon Claiborne who might be the best running back in this entire conference. I know he wasn't the preseason All-ACC running back, but he is going to be on one of those All-ACC teams. You can pretty much guarantee that. Quarterback, they've still got to get figured out. I think by this point in the season, Deshaun Purdy will have taken over, who is the better quarterback of the two. Robbie Ashford is the guy that's going to get the first start for them out of the gate. But I figure by this point, they will have figured out that Purdy gives them a little bit of a better chance to win. Biggest thing for them is that, I think they're going to be able to keep up offensively. They'll compete against Carolina on that end, and they'll be able to put up a decent amount of points. I think it will be less than they've done in years past. I think it'll probably be somewhere in the 20s, maybe it gets into the 30s, maybe. But by that point in the season, Carolina's offense will be ready to play those types of games. And I just don't see how Wake Forest defense is going to be able to slow down what Carolina's doing. I know that's one of the things that Dickert really wants to come in there and change about this program, but I just don't know how much it necessarily changes in year one. I don't think that there is nearly as much confidence in their defensive coordinator and Scotty Hazelton as there is in their offensive coordinator, Robbie Zell, who comes in and takes over after a stint at South Alabama. So I would believe that Carolina gets it done in this game. They go to 7-3 and advance to play the Duke Blue Devils, who, an interesting way to finish up the season. You go Duke, NC State back-to-back to close it out. Duke, Carolina is going to go into that game as the underdog, at least from this point of the year. They actually, believe it or not, already have a spread on this game. I don't know how that's even possible, but I guess if you want to long play it that much, Carolina would go in a 1.5-point underdog in this game to Duke. Duke given a 54.8% chance to win according to ESPN Analytics. So this is one of those games where I think most people believe it's going to be a toss-up. What do you think about this game against the rival that we know Bill Belichick hates the most out of the two?
Yeah, I wonder if it'll be what it was for me on my video game in my Dynasty, which was a battle of 2 top 10 teams trying to secure a spot in the ACC title game and the college football playoff. I don't think it's going to be that. I'll say this. I think Duke will be a better team than they were a year ago. I don't know if the record will reflect it, because the schedule year 2 under Manny Diaz is a lot tougher than it was year 1 for Manny. But that being said, though, they paid their quarterback, Darren Mensah, $8 million. So expectations are high for Duke football, which is not something you hardly ever say out loud, whether it's on the radio or in podcast form. I think these 2 games were going to be the final 2 games of the season. I think are where you're going to see Belichick really show up, stand out in a big way, as compared to Mac Brown. When Mac Brown came back, he talked about the importance of winning rivalry games, and that it was the lifeline of your program, and how it impacted fan reaction, recruiting, and the like. And he's not wrong, especially in a sport like college football, that I think as much as any sport we have here in North America is so dependent on its rivalries, just for the way you feel about the sport. The problem was that, he won a lot of these games early, but then he started losing them. And when he lost them, he didn't seem overly affected by it, which is not what you want to see from your head football coach when guys like you and I live to beat Duke. I live to beat NC State. Mm-hmm. When it does not happen, my life is pure hell. Whether it's in football, basketball, God knows we lose them in fencing, I'm mad about it. I think you'll see a different mindset, a different attitude from this team when they get into these rivalry games. And, we can all joke about Bill Belichick and the whole beat Duke thing, but I mean, it's something that he talks about all the time. So there is a little bit of resentment towards the Blue Devils. And I think that'll be coached into his team. And I think you'll see Carolina play kind of pissed off when they play Duke under him. So I think it'll be kind of what it's always been, which is somewhat of a mini classic, maybe not the prettiest game. But I do think Carolina goes to Durham, wins back the victory bell. Or it was the game in Chapel Hill. The game's in Chapel Hill. So we keep the victory. We retake the victory bell. We keep it in its rightful home in Chapel Hill, and Carolina improves to 9-2 in Bill Belichick's first season on the job.
Yeah, I mean, this one's tough because when I originally picked the schedule, when we were going through it a couple of weeks ago on the Wes and Walker show, I had this game as a loss. I think that this Duke team is going to be incredibly, incredibly good up front defensively. I think might be one of the best in the country. I mean, Wesley Williams, along with Vincent Anthony Jr., Aaron Hall, these are some really talented defensive linemen. And they are going to put a lot of pressure on Gio Lopez in this game. You then got a secondary that is pretty loaded with Chandler Rivers, Terry Moore. Chandler Rivers is going to be a guy that's going to be first-team All-ACC at the end of the year, more than likely. Could be a guy that goes in the first round of the NFL draft at the cornerback spot. They are loaded defensively. Offensively, I think they'll be better. I think Darian Mensah will be better, but I think you saw towards the end of last year that there are some cracks in the foundation for him. He's not necessarily the most steady quarterback in the country. They paid him like he is the most steady quarterback in the country. So again, I think they'll be better on the offensive side of the football, but I just don't know how great Darian Mensah is going to be. Is he going to be one of the top quarterbacks in this conference? I don't necessarily think so. I think he'll be more towards the middle of the pack. I think him and Gio Lopez will be rather even when they match up in this matchup. So, I mean, yeah, I think you look at the wide receiver position for Duke. They need some guys to step up there. I think they probably will get some guys that'll step up there as the year goes along. Their running game is expected to be pretty solid with Jaquiz Moore. This is one of the hardest games to predict of the season. But I'll change my prediction officially here tonight. I think Carolina ends up beating Duke. The first time that I thought this through, I said, I think Carolina probably does end up winning this game, but I thought they would lose one of the two rivalry games. I don't think they're going to. I think Carolina is going to win this game, and you already know what's going to happen in my mind in the next game, which we'll talk about here in just a second. But I think Carolina being at home is really big in this one. I think the extra motivation that's going to be built into this Carolina team by Bill Belichick, that this is the most important rival that you face. I think that's certainly going to show in this matchup, and Carolina gets the win and gets the victory bell back. Then you have to go on the road to close the regular season against NC State. Could still be a chance to go to the ACC championship on the line here, but we'll have to just wait and see. NC State, a 58.0% chance to win this game, according to ESPN Analytics. They are a 2.5-point favorite, according to the early ESPN Bet Sportsbook odds. This is an NC State team that a lot of people are pretty down on. There's a decent amount of people that have them finishing double digits in the ACC, 10th or lower, something like that. And I think this is going to be one of their down years. There's no doubt about that. But this is always going to be a tough test for Carolina, especially having to go on the road to take them on. And you do kind of wonder with how much Bill Belichick is focused on Duke and how important that is to him. How important is this game going to be for him against NC State?
I think it'll be important because I think it was made. It'll be if it wasn't made known to him by now, it'll be made known to him the week of the game what this means and how important a win would be against them, considering it's been, 3 straight losses to them. And they've all been very frustrating in their own ways. And what's very interesting about this game is that it could be for Dave Doran what this past year was for Mac Brown. It could be his swan song as State's head coach. If the season really goes as sideways as there's potential for it to go, that could be a department that's ready to move on and try to find someone that could do better than go 8-4 when you're a preseason top 25 team. It feels like once every 3 years. So, you have that aspect of it. It is a road game. We know how difficult it is to go into that building and win and compete, or how difficult it has been for Carolina to go in there and win and compete. But I mentioned, I think Belichick will treat the rivalry games like the division games. I think this will be the teams that they know the best from their scouting, from what they do going into it, from their game plan. And I think Carolina will be motivated to quit losing to these guys because it's not fun. Because then you got to hear, a below average human being talk crap about you. And that's what Dave Doran is. He's a below average head coach. He's a below average human. And I think it's time to shut him up, quite frankly. And so I know Belichick will, I think he personally values the Duke rivalry, and I understand that. I do think he'll be made aware that in football, this is the game that, as much as any rivalry game, we want to win. We want to beat State more than anything else. And I think he'll get his team to play with that desperation that we don't see them play with very often in this game. So I think Carolina goes into Carter Finley. I think they come away with a win, and that to me has them sitting at 6-2. And what I'll do is I'll stick with what my preseason media prediction poll was when I filled that out back at ACC kickoff. I had Clemson and Miami meeting for the ACC championship game.
Yep.
So I think Carolina gets that double-digit win plateau, and I think they're definitely very much in the conversation and the hunt. But I told you what I thought about Clemson. That's my pick to win the national championship. I'm a believer in Carson Beck in Miami. I think those two teams get to Charlotte to play for the conference championship, but make no mistake about it. If this team with 70 new players goes 10-2 and they win the rivalry games that we want them to win, and they compete against the Clemson the way we talked about, we'll be as high as we've ever been about Carolina football since we've started doing this podcast. And that'll be a great place to be come the end of November, when I think this team achieves a 10-win season in the regular year.
Yeah, let's hope that's the case for Carolina. I think they're going to win this game as well. I just think that State, you look at them this year, to me, they're not a bowl team. They're a 5-7 football team when I went through their schedule. CJ Bailey, there's a lot to like about him. Hollywood Smothers in the backfield, but they did end up losing some depth there in the backfield. I question what they're going to be at wide receiver, because the guys that were supposed to be big players for them last year didn't really step up. And then defensively, I thought they made a horrible hire. I thought DJ Elliott was a horrendous hire as the defensive coordinator. The last time that we saw him, he was at Temple. That wasn't a good defense that he had there. And you don't expect that this year it's going to really be any better for NC State. And so I definitely think that Carolina, coming into this game, there's going to be the extra motivation that we've seen in years past. That hasn't necessarily been there. There'll be, instead of fighting after the game, there'll be a lot more stuff in the game that looks like the way it's supposed to. It'll look like a more prepared football team, and I think that's going to be the difference for Carolina, and that's the reason why I have them going 9-3 in the regular season, 6-2 in conference play. I too think they will be in contention to make it to the ACC championship game, but I think due to tiebreakers, they will fall short, and it will be Miami that will be going to the ACC championship game for this year against Clemson. I think Clemson's certainly the best team in this conference. So even if Carolina was to get there, I think even with a rematch against them, especially in Charlotte, not saying it would be as bad as some of the ones or as bad as the one that we saw a few years ago, but I don't think that Carolina would be able to take them down in a place that's basically become a second home for Clemson, even if they were to be able to get there. All right, so now we've got that done. Let's go to the breakout players. By the way, if you want to leave your record predictions for us, we'll read some of those off at the end of the show for you guys. If you have, what your win-loss prediction, we don't need you to go game by game, but we just need you to give us your record prediction for the season. We'll read some of those again at the end of this episode. But we're going to the breakout players for this season. And, this list to me, I found it pretty easy to go through this group. I think these are some really safe guys on my side of things. I think for you, you probably felt the same way, that a lot of these guys feel pretty safe because there are a lot of guys to pick from. In years past, Carolina's returning a lot of guys that were starters a year ago, a lot of guys that have already broken out. This year's roster, it feels completely different. You've got 70 new faces. You've got a lot of guys who haven't necessarily started for Carolina, but are looking to play big roles for them in their second or third years with the program. And so I started it out. To me, the guy that's the safest bet for me is Jordan Shipp. I think he's going to have a huge, huge season for Carolina this year. I think he leads the team in receiving. We've seen that he has become a leader. He's a guy that's speaking at a lot of the that's spoken multiple times during the offseason. He spoke back in June, which would, that was the first wave of guys that they sent up there. That shows you that he was one of the first guys that really stepped up. He was with the team when they went to ACC kickoff. I think that's also a big feather in his cap. And from all indications, he looks the part. He can do just about everything. He can affect the game at all three levels. And I think that's certainly what Carolina is looking for. I think he's going to lead this team in receiving, and I think he's going to be a guy that's going to be on the precipice of making an all-ACC team. So my first breakout player for this year is Jordan Shipp.
I think he is the safest person to go with, just because, it's not just Carolina guys that talk about him being a guy that's going to take a big step forward. Guys that, know the league, know the sport, maybe followed him in recruiting, think he's really poised to take a big step forward in his second season. But he's not the first guy that I'll go with. I'll go with the quarterback. I'll go with Gio Lopez. If you're going to win 10 games, if you're going to put yourself in contention to win an ACC or play for an ACC championship, you're going to have your quarterback be a big reason why. And I look at him, and there are still some people that think that, because it's not known that he's going to be the starter officially, but I think that's our expectation. The guy I worked with this morning, Travis T-Bone Hancock, says he does think Max Johnson will see meaningful snaps, significant snaps this season. I does think Gio Lopez will be a guy that, starts from day one and plays every single snap. I don't think it goes that way. I do think he will have to ease into it. I do think there will be an acclimation process to the level of competition, the offense that he's being asked to learn and being going to have to operate. But when you watch the film, you see why Carolina went and got him. And you see why Carolina invested in him, that $2.1 million we've talked so much about since the spring. I think he throws a pretty deep ball with little effort. It's just a very nice, smooth delivery. He can pull the ball down and run, which I do think, Bill Belichick will be open to that being a bigger part of his offense at the college level as opposed to what you see at the pro level. And I do think that, yes, they've got to find guys that emerge at the wide receiver room, but I think their ability to run the football will make the game easier on him. But I do think when it's all said and done, I think he'll total north of, 3,500 yards of total offense. I think he'll total 30-ish, if not more, touchdowns. So we put his name in the conversation to be the ACC newcomer of the year. And I do think that he'll have us feeling really good about where the quarterback spot is going into year two, where if he comes back for that senior season, then we can talk about this team and this program ready to compete for a conference championship and maybe a spot in the college football playoff.
Yeah, my second breakout player, I think, is Davian Goss. I think you look at him, you look at what he's done so far in his career. Last year was a nice preview into what he can bring to the table for Carolina. Ran for 326 yards and 4 touchdowns last year on just 67 carries. You go back to that game against Charlotte, I think that really showed his potential, that he's a guy, when he takes the majority of the snaps, he's going to be able to carry the load for Carolina. He does it in, majority of different ways, a little bit shiftier than a guy like Amarian Hampton, but still runs with an edge. I think he's going to be a guy that this year receives the bulk of the carries. I do think that you're going to see some other guys in that backfield, especially a guy like Benjamin Hall, who has really performed well here during fall camp. I think you could see Caleb Hood a little bit there as well. They're going to want to keep him fresher than they were able to keep Amari and Hampton, because I just don't know if Goss can handle that type of workload. I don't think they feel like they're going to need him to handle that type of workload either, because I don't think they feel like the drop-off behind him is nearly as steep as it was last year, even though when we saw Goss out there, we felt pretty good about what he was able to bring to the table. I think this year, I don't know if he gets to 1,000 yards, because I do think that they are going to probably split those carries up a decent amount. I think Benjamin Hall is going to be a guy that could potentially run for 400, 500 yards for Carolina this season. And I don't think they're going to be nearly as good as they were when they had Michael Carter, Javonte Williams, where you could have two backs that are challenging for, 1,000 yards or anything like that. But I do think this will still be a pretty strong running game for Carolina. I think he's probably somewhere in that 800 yards range, maybe gets into contention for 1,000 yards, but I expect that he will be pushing for all ACC honors by the end of the season, which shows that he's one of the best running backs in the conference.
Yeah, this is where we start lining up our guys, as it feels like it happens every year. I'll have Jordan Shipp next. I'll go ahead and ruin that one. But, yeah, I've got Davian Goss as well. I do think he will crack the 1,000-yard threshold, just because I think Carolina's offense is going to be more run-oriented, more run-balanced at the beginning of the year than maybe we see it in the middle or towards the end of the year, to where even though I think, he can be splitting hoods with the Benjamin Hall or splitting carries with the Benjamin Hall, I do think he's still going to get a workload where he can, kind of pad some stats. I think, against a Charlotte, against a Richmond, does he break a long run or two that really kind of put him over the top in terms of that yardage total as the season moves along? I think he hits 1,000 yards on the ground. I think he hits pay dirt 10 times, and I think he really emerges as not just one of the best backs in the conference. I think we got us getting a lot of love nationally as well. And I think it's something you got to credit, Mac Brown and that staff for. They inherited some great running backs with Michael Carter and Javonte Williams. That was a position that they recruited well during their time. And it gives, Bill Belichick, I think, a focal point of his first offense as the head coach. And so I think Davian Goss will break out in a significant way this year for Carolina. And just let me go really quickly, because you already talked about Jordan Shipp. I've got him on my list as well. Stardom, I think, is in play here. I think this could be a guy that, when we're talking about him, by the end of next season, and I think there's a good chance after next year he's going pro. We could be talking about, him having, two of the more productive years we've seen a wide receiver have at Carolina. I think he's going to have, 60, 65 plus catches this year. I think he'll, cross 800 yards easily, maybe threaten 1,000 yards as well. And I think anywhere from 8 to 10 touchdowns is in play for the guy that wears number 1. When you saw the first edition of the Come Up, you kind of saw how much important it was for him being a Charlotte kid, the son of a legend, to play for Carolina. And he's motivated to get Carolina back on that Charlotte stage in terms of playing for a conference championship. And so I think he is going to be a guy that just really has a magnificent season, a big time season, as I think he'll emerge as Gio Lopez's go-to target very early on this year. So I know you had, Goss, I have Goss. I know you had Shipp, I have Shipp. And I think both those dudes are primed and ready, along with Gio Lopez, to be the new faces of Carolina's offense, one that I do think will be just as explosive as we've seen in years past.
Yeah, I think, honestly, with Shipp, he will get to 1,000 yards. I think you could see him being a guy that gets 70-plus receptions this year because he can just do it at every level. He's a guy that's going to be able to help you in the short passing game. You will be able to use him in the screen game. He's a guy that, when you need some of those short yardage completions, like short slants to be able to move the sticks, he's going to be there for you. But he's also going to be a guy that in the intermediate game really takes over. I think he's going to be one that, Gio Lopez is going to be most comfortable with as the season starts, even with Kobe Paysour in there. I feel like he's the guy that's going to be the one that gets the majority of the targets. And then as a deep threat, that ability is there too. He is, not slow by any means. He'll be able to win some routes down the field. And then when it comes to the 50-50 balls, I think that's in his area of expertise as well. So with all of that put together, you're talking about a guy that's going to be one of the best wide receivers in this conference. And for him to be an all ACC member at the end of the season really is a big statement for him, because this conference has a lot of really talented wide receivers. I think by me saying that shows you how much I believe in him. With Davian Goss, I think the thing with him is that there are going to be so many guys taking carries in that backfield, including starting quarterback Gio Lopez, who I think will start for the entirety of the season. I think Bone is absolutely insane for thinking that he won't. The only way that he doesn't is if he gets banged up. But to me, there's no way that his play is going to be bad enough where you're going to have to see Max Johnson. And if that's the case, and if he can stay healthy, which I think is going to be key for him because he is a guy that takes a lot of hits, he's going to be a guy that runs for 600-700 yards on the ground too. So I just think that Davian Goss, things will be split up just a little bit too much for him to get to that 1,000-yard mark. But like I said, I see him getting to at least 800 yards, pushing to be on the precipice of getting to 1,000 yards. Maybe he's in, somewhere close to that 950 mark, somewhere just short of 1,000 yards, and gets him those all ACC honors. I think you're right. I think he'll find the end zone double-digit amount of times, because I do think that's going to be one of the more reliable things for Carolina in the red zone, is going to be running the football. I think this offensive line is set to be able to run the ball a little bit better, or not better than in years past. But I think with the fact that you've got a running back that isn't able to break tackles nearly as easily, I do think this is going to be more of a road grading unit that's going to block a little bit better in the run game and allow for similar production on the ground, because Omarion Hampton was simply just a beast. I move over to the defensive side of the ball for my final three guys, and I'll start with Will Hardy. I think this is one of the guys that, you look at him, he is another one that has taken a huge step forward in terms of leadership. You look at, the fact that he was one of the first guys to speak on the stand back in June when they had media availability. He, too, was in attendance for ACC Media Days and was one of the guys that was doing a lot of the speaking for Carolina. I think this is a guy that the staff has quickly gained trust in him, and you can see that he is a leader, not only with with the fact that he was in attendance for these speaking events, but the fact that he was a guy that on the come up really looked like one of the main leaders of this team, looked like he was the guy that was leading the defense while Christo Kelly was the guy leading the offense. I think that's huge for Carolina. I think that matters a lot, especially in Bill Belichick's system. And I think that he's going to get a good amount of snaps this year that he hasn't gotten in years past. I think this is the breakout year for him. I think you're going to see a really complete player on the back end of this defense. I think you're going to see one of the better tacklers for Carolina this year. I think he'll finish either second or third on the team in tackles behind Andrew Simpson. Maybe one of the other linebackers gets in there, or God forbid, maybe a defensive tackle puts up some huge numbers this year or something like that, where they're slowing down the run at a really strong rate. But I think he's certainly going to be one of the top tacklers on this team. I think he's a guy that's shown at times that he can create turnovers. I think you'll see more of that this year with him being able to play a little more free. I think that's one of the things that we heard from him that I think really stood out to me, and hopefully that allows him to have more success this season out of that role for Carolina. I think it does, and I think he's going to have a big year defensively.
And my last two guys are on the defensive side of the football as well. And I'll go with Kamori House as the first guy that I'll talk about. I think this is, we were talking about him I think it was last week we did the linebacker preview. And, concerns about never having been a full-time starter. And I think that's it's a good thing to bring up. It's something fair to point out. I just think the talent is there for him to be a big-time player for Carolina in this defense. I think the familiarity with the system, the scheme, benefits him. There isn't the acclimation process that there is for some other guys on the roster. He knows what his job is, what his role is. And I do think maybe the fact that, Carolina will maybe look to try to rotate some guys that led that linebacker spot might help him so he won't be worn down, as we get, deep into the season. But I think him and Andrew Simpson are going to be, a fantastic 1-2 punch in that linebacker role. Thaddeus Dixon is a guy that, gets a lot of attention coming over from Washington, and rightfully so. I think he's going to be a very good corner for Carolina. As we talked about, where we think maybe the strength of this defense at the beginning of the year is going to be in that back seven while that defensive line kind of figures itself out up front. But I think Kamori House is going to emerge as that next linebacker that we can identify as a difference maker, that we can identify as a baller. The hope is that his defensive line isn't getting blocked into him every other play, and he can go make the plays that we didn't get to see a guy like a Power Eccles make on a routine basis. Not that he wasn't capable, it's just the fact that he was never given the opportunity because of how poor the defensive line played in front of him. So I expect Carolina's defensive line to be much better, and I think you'll be able to see Kamori House's talent jump off the radar in a big way, and I think he'll break out for Carolina's defense, one that I think will be much improved under the guidance of Bill and Steve Belichick.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that I think next year around this time we could be talking about as a breakout player. I just wonder how much time he splits with Mekhi Beor because of just how small he is. I think that's one of the things that you kind of worry about, but I think there is a chance that they are looking for a guy that basically is a hybrid safety, the linebacker that is out there playing for significant snaps, especially on the defensive or during the third downs that Carolina will be facing this year. I think that is certainly something that you could see this year. So, I mean, I like that one. I don't have him on my list personally, but he is one guy that was just on the outside looking in. The other guy that, or the next guy that I have is Smith Vilbert, the defensive end for Carolina. And here's the thing. If you're asking where is a guy like Thaddeus Dixon, where is a guy like Price Yates, those are guys who have already broken out. They have had their, pretty successful moments in their careers prior to this. I mean, an all Big 12 honorable mention or Big 10 honorable mention, for Thaddeus Dixon last year. You saw, at UConn, very productive seasons out of Price Yates. And so we're looking for guys that maybe haven't produced just yet and that are ready to finally break out. And that's what I feel like Smith Vilbert is. He's a guy that was in Penn State system for a long, long time, 4 years spent there. And now he gets his chance here at Carolina. And I think, from all indications, he has looked the part in fall camp. A guy that brings plenty of size at 6'6", 282 pounds. And I think, you look at what he did last year, 12 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, and 1.5 sacks. I think he will at least double his total tackles. I think there's a good chance he could triple those. I think tackles for loss, there's a good chance that he could finish with 10 or more this year. And I think sacks, you could see a guy that finishes with 5, maybe 6, 6.5, somewhere in that range. And I think if he gets to that, you should feel pretty good for Carolina because Price Yates is the guy that you're hoping gets after the quarterback at the highest level. Maybe gets to him 7, 8 times, maybe even gets to that double-digit mark. You would love to see that. I don't know if that's necessarily what he's going to be able to do this year. But, considering he never did it at UConn, but you never really know, especially as a senior, especially in a new place where he's going to be relied on heavily. He could end up doing that. But I think Smith Vilbert has a really solid season opposite of him. I think this was one of those guys that when you turned on the film, you saw a guy that really has some good speed off the edge. He has a really good release off the line of scrimmage, and he's going to be able to wreak havoc, I think, on some of these offensive tackles this year. I think he was buried on the depth chart, which is easy to have happen at Penn State, especially when you've got a guy like Abdul Carter that's in front of you. I think this year he really stands out for Carolina. I expect him to have a pretty big season for Carolina opposite of Price Yates.
All right, and my last guy is the guy that you mentioned a few moments ago, and that's Will Hardy. He's my last breakout player. He probably is a guy, as much as any player individually on this roster, I think I'm pulling for to have a good season. You just kind of get to learn more about him, see kind of what he is as a player, what he is as a human being. Just as easy a guy on the roster that there is to root for. I think he'll benefit from the type of coaching he'll get now as compared to what he was given a year ago. Because I think this is a guy that will benefit more from, honing in on his fundamentals, being more, technical sound with the way that he's played his position, become a much more sure tackler because he has to be to really be a breakout player. It's not that he lacks talent, but, for him to really emerge, he's kind of got to do all the little things well. But I think he's a guy that, as much as anybody on the defensive side of the football, I think Belichick will kind of gravitate towards because they know he's a gym rat. He's going to watch the film. He's a leader. We've seen that, really step up in a lot of ways this year. And so I don't know what a tackle total looks like. I don't want to say he's going to come out here and intercept 3 passes. I don't want to put that. But I think just him shoring up the back end of Carolina's defense, that alone will be such a game changer for this group that has really struggled, to have a guy that you just know, man, when he's there, he's going to make a play. And I think that's what he's going to become for this team is that he's going to be in position more often than not. And when he's in position, he's going to make that tackle. He's going to break up that pass. He's going to do whatever that needs to be done in that moment for the defense to win that particular play. So he's probably been the guy I've man crushed the most on this offseason, this preseason. And I think he's going to have a big time season for Carolina, his final year with the program. And I think he'll be a guy that, when you look at the culture and the foundation being set in year one under Bill Belichick and see, okay, who's the guy you can point to that was a big part of that foundation being laid? I think Will Hart will be a guy we'll be talking about 2, 3, 4 years from now as a guy that really helped get this program turned back in the way we all want and expect it to be.
Yeah, one guy that I'm hoping is going to be that for Carolina, one of the guys you can point to as well is going to be DeAndre Robinson, the defensive tackle. This was arguably Carolina's biggest signing out of the transfer portal. And part of it was, yes, this is a guy that, is filling a very significant need for Carolina along that defensive line. But at the same time, you're talking about a guy that is uber talented, a 4-star prospect coming out of high school last year in just 162 snaps on defense. He finished the season with 17 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, a sack and a half, and 2 quarterback hurries. I think this year with more responsibility on his plate, this is going to be a guy that's going to be able to take advantage of that. He's going to be, a guy that brings the physical edge that Carolina is looking for on that defensive line. And he's going to be a guy that I think with his size is going to be able to help you stop the run and take some of the pressure off of those linebackers that they've been dealing with over the last few years. I don't know if it's a perfect season from him. I don't think out of the gate he's going to be exactly what he is towards the end of the season. But I think by the end of the year, you will feel very secure with the defensive line spot, mainly because of him. I think the defensive tackle spot in particular is one that, a lot of people are looking for more consistency from. I think as the year goes along, you're going to see a consistent player start to appear here because when he flashed last year, he was making some big plays. Now in year 2 with more responsibility, it only makes sense that he's going to progress and become a guy that is a pretty consistent player for Carolina. And I think, that's what Bill Belichick and his staff have the challenge of doing with these guys is finding guys on the defensive side of the football that can be more consistent. I think you're going to see that from Will Hardy. I think you're going to see that from Smith Vilbert now that he gets his opportunity. And I think the same thing from DeAndre Robinson. You're going to see guys that are just coached better, that will not wear down as the season goes along and will only get better as the year goes along. And that's going to be the big difference for Carolina this season. So that wraps it up for this edition of the podcast. Guys, make sure you head over to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. Check out all the coverage we got there for you. Of course, we will be putting up the breakout players for you guys. That'll go up tomorrow. We'll tag this edition of the podcast in there for you guys. So make sure that you guys are heading over to the website and checking that out. Also, we will be getting you ready for TCU. We are right on the doorstep of that. So keep an eye out for the TCU preview. That'll be up sometime later on this week, hoping to get it up on Thursday, but could be Friday before we end up getting the preview, the article out for you guys, which of course will go real in depth in terms of team breakdowns, team stat breakdowns, as well as the injury report. All of the stuff that we've done in years past, we'll be bringing it to you again this year. So make sure that you guys are keeping an eye out for that. Going to wait until we hopefully get a depth chart, at least for TCU, or at least one that's something that we can go off of when it comes to TCU for you guys. But, who knows if we'll see that happen here in the next coming days. If Carolina doesn't put one out, you never know. TCU might not, but we'll have those projected starters and everything like that in there for you guys. It may come from us personally projecting the starters, but regardless, that will be in there for you guys to take a look at. In terms of the podcast side of things, we got Travis Burgess stopping by with us tomorrow. Make sure that you guys are tuning in for that one. It'll be a mini episode of the podcast, only about 12 minutes long, but it is a really good sit down with the quarterback prospect for Carolina in the 2026 class. Talk to him a little bit about his start to the season, why he chose Carolina, and plenty of other stuff. So make sure that you tune in for that. Hoping that we can, there's some things in the works for another guest or two to come on this week before we get the season started on Monday night. And then, of course, Thursday, that is going to be our preview night the entire season with me doing high school football and stuff like that on Friday nights for WFNZ. That it's naturally just smart for us to do it on Thursday night for you guys. So we're going to be making that our night that we're going for the preview editions of the podcast. We'll do that this week as well. Thursday night, the preview of the game against TCU. Be here so that you can listen to that one. If you miss it, you can catch up wherever you listen to your podcast, or by going to our YouTube page. Just go and search Heel Tough Blog on YouTube. Make sure when you go there and find our page that you do subscribe to it. We would greatly appreciate that. Again, we are really pushing that YouTube page, guys. If you're watching anywhere, even if you're watching on Twitter or on Facebook, the preferred way that we would love for you guys to watch it is over there on YouTube. Help our YouTube numbers out right now. But we greatly appreciate all those people watching on Twitter and watching on Facebook as well. So that's going to wrap it up once again for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.